By all accounts, Golden Age legend Frank Sinatra was a man who was not to be messed with. There are many who suggest that the crooner-turned-film star had mob ties, and those who crossed him feared retribution. While most were afraid of messing with Frank, there was one man who had the courage to push his buttons. Join Facts First as we explore how Don Rickles pranked Frank Sinatra and he never saw it coming. When Don Rickles passed away in 2017, he left behind a legacy to be reckoned with. The insult comedian grew to prominence as a figure on late-night talk shows. Whereas most performers spent their time trying to get the audience on their good side, Don was a performer not afraid to get on their bad side. He became so proficient at insult comedy, audiences would fear him, but they still couldn't help but tune in to see what the comedian would say next. His fearless insult comedy led to him getting the nickname Mr. Warmth during his career. That nickname was meant to be ironic. Don was as cold as could be, though that didn't mean he didn't have a soft side. Don held many friendships over the course of his career and even tried his hand at romance 1 or 2 times. But the insult comedian's cold nature on stage and comparatively warmer personal life often butted heads. Sometimes he couldn't help himself from using his insult comedy skills against the people he loved, and this included Frank Sinatra. Don and Frank were buddies from their Vegas days and remained friends throughout their lives. There are few figures in Hollywood that have commanded quite as much respect as Frank Sinatra, and for the most part, Frank maintained his respect deservedly. The singer-turned-film star was a rightful icon of Hollywood's golden age who started out as a pop crooner before becoming a highly acclaimed actor. He was a legend in Vegas and not afraid to let his wild side show. And while Frank was rightfully respected in the entertainment industry for his talents, he was also feared for his alleged mob ties. This was another reason that the average person was afraid to cross the star. But Don Rickles wasn't the average person. He was an insult comic first and foremost, and this often bled into his friendship with Sinatra. Their close and personal relationship led to Don being one of the only figures who could make fun of Frank without fear of facing retribution. For the most part, Don got away with keeping up his insult comic appearances during his interactions with Frank. Don wasn't afraid to publicly greet Frank upon the singer's arrival at parties by telling him to make himself at home by hitting one of the guests. Domestic violence certainly wasn't a topic that most would bring up around Frank Sinatra lightly, though Don was able to get away with saying such things as a result of their close bond. Though Don got away with poking fun at Frank publicly on numerous occasions, there was one prank he pulled on the crooner that seems to have crossed the line. The incident occurred when Don Rickles was dating a woman who refused to believe that he was a close and personal friend of Sinatra. According to the late Frank Sinatra himself, Don pulled him aside while the two were dining at the same restaurant and asked him a personal favor. Frank claimed that Don asked him to come up to his and his date's table and begin making conversation to show they were friends. Frank agreed to perform the request, though things didn't turn out the way the singer was expecting. Sinatra says he went up to Don's table and began making conversation, only for the insult comedian to act as if the crooner was imposing. This certainly impressed the woman Don was dating, but it didn't impress Sinatra. Don took things too far with this prank, and Frank got his revenge with a prank of his own. Before we tell you more, be sure to give this video a like and subscribe to Facts First if you haven't already. Frank Sinatra was pissed about Don Rickles' prank. When Don Rickles humiliated Frank Sinatra with his restaurant prank, the crooner became very upset. He decided he was going to get revenge on his longtime friend. Frank knew he'd have to do something huge if he was going to get even, so he started planning the biggest prank he could. At the time, Don was performing at the Sahara Las Vegas. Frank decided he'd have Don Rickles arrested in the middle of a performance. When the event went down, Don had no idea why he was getting arrested, and neither did the audience. The 2 police officers who whisked away the insult comedian brought him to the table of Frank Sinatra, and it was then that Don realized what happened. At first, Don feared he'd lose his gig at the Sahara. Thankfully, this didn't happen. Still, Frank undeniably got even. Though Frank wasn't happy in the moment when Don performed his memorable restaurant prank, the story ended up becoming one of Frank's favorites to recount. He memorably told the story on The Tonight Show, starring Johnny Carson, where it was forever immortalized. Despite the prank war that ensued between Don and Frank, the two remained friends until the latter figure's death in '98. Upon Frank Sinatra's passing, Don Rickles acted as one of the pallbearers. Nearly 2 decades later, Don passed away at age 90. Though Don and Frank could get on each other's bad sides, they also saw the good in one another until the end. Frank Sinatra's high standing often made it hard for him to connect with people, and Don Rickles had similar problems as a result of his ice-cold comic persona. The two formed an unlikely bond that stood the test of time. Don Rickles came up in show business the hard way. Don Rickles was born in Queens in 1926. He set his sights on stardom at a young age and worked hard to achieve the fame he did. During World War II, he served in the Philippines as a seaman. By the time he got back from serving in the war, he'd refined his comedic talents and was ready to start performing on stage. He eventually became a notable figure to the public thanks to his appearances on late-night talk shows. He was also a legend in Vegas, where he met Sinatra. Though Don's success was mostly relegated to the world of insult comedy, he found unlikely fame on the big screen during the 90s. In 1995, he took on a dramatic role in Scorsese's epic drama Casino. The performance not only paid tribute to the insult comedian's Vegas roots, but also tribute to his ongoing mob-adjacent friendship with Frank Sinatra. Though Don's legacy remains a comedian first and foremost, it also remains frightening how well he stepped into the role of the intimidating crime boss he played in Casino. While his role in Casino proved to audiences he was just as tough as he was funny, he took on another screen role during the 90s that made him popular with a new generation. In 1995, he voiced the character of Mr. Potato Head in the classic animated film Toy Story, and he reprised the role several times before his death in 2017. The Toy Story films have made Don Rickles' voice familiar to generations of kids. Now it's time to hear from you. Did you know about the prank war between Don Rickles and Frank Sinatra? Let us know in the comment section below. And before you go, make sure you give this video a like and subscribe to Facts First if you haven't already. Click the bell icon to stay updated on all our latest content. By the way, if you haven't joined Facts First as a member yet, be sure to look below this video and click the join button. By becoming a paid member of Facts First, you'll get access to exclusive video content that you won't find anywhere else. This includes some of our more mature content that isn't suitable for public audiences, which includes topics like Hollywood actresses who posed for Playboy and some of the steamiest moments in movie history. Plus, you can enjoy these videos completely ad-free. Our biggest fans will notice they also get badges next to their name when they leave comments on our videos. We pay special attention to comments from our members, and so do other viewers. So if you want exclusive content from Facts First or inside access to discussions with other community members, click the join button to get started for just $4.99. There are hours of members-only videos waiting for you, with new videos added every month. And we're actively working on bringing even more features to help fans like you connect with other members and get more of your favorite content. Just click join, and we'll see you inside the membership tab.